Welcome back to History USA, where we uncover the pivotal moments that shaped America. What you're about to discover is a story so shocking that it changed the course of an entire continent. Picture this. It's 1794. A single battle, fought in what we now call Ohio, would determine whether the United States would expand westward or remain trapped forever along the eastern seaboard. The stakes could not have been higher, and the outcome would defy the expectations of everyone involved. In the dense forests of the Ohio Territory, two worlds collided with consequences that neither side could fully imagine. On one side stood the most powerful Native American confederation ever assembled on North American soil, an alliance of nations led by war chiefs whose brilliance had already humiliated the United States Army in not one, but two devastating defeats. These leaders were not merely defending land, they were defending centuries of culture, tradition, and survival itself. For them, every tree, every river, and every hunting ground was sacred, and they fought with the knowledge that their entire way of life was at stake. On the other side was a disgraced American general, given one final chance to redeem both himself and his nation's honor. The United States, only a decade old, was fragile, drowning in war debt, and desperate to prove it could survive as a continental power. If it could not secure the fertile Northwest Territory, what we now know as Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and beyond, the nation's future was in jeopardy. Westward expansion was not just about land, it was about survival, wealth, and legitimacy on the world stage. The forests of Ohio became more than battlegrounds, they became the testing ground of America's destiny. Native warriors, numbering in the thousands, prepared to defend their homelands with unmatched knowledge of the terrain and finely honed tactics. Facing them was an American army that had already suffered humiliation at the hands of these same warriors. For the soldiers of the United States, the coming battle was not just another campaign. It was a fight to restore faith in their young republic, to prove that the sacrifices of the revolution had not been in vain. What happened next would shock both sides, rewriting the map of America forever. But to understand why this clash mattered so deeply, we must step back. We must return to the very founding of the Republic itself, because the seeds of this war were sown not in the forests of Ohio, but in the very halls where the Constitution was written. To understand why the Battle of Fallen Timbers mattered so much, we need to go back to the very birth of the United States. The Revolution had been won, the Constitution written, and the Republic born, but the dream of freedom came with a price tag. By the late 1780s, the national government was drowning in debt. Millions were owed to soldiers who had fought for independence, to suppliers who had bankrolled the war, and to foreign creditors who had gambled on America's survival. The nation's leaders feared that if this debt crisis remained unsolved, their fragile republic might collapse before it even had a chance to grow. The answer, they believed, lay beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Stretching out across fertile valleys and endless forests was the Northwest Territory, land that today makes up Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota. To most Americans of the time, this wilderness represented hope. New farmland for struggling families, new towns that could fuel prosperity, and most importantly, a new tax base that could rescue the nation from financial ruin. The plan was straightforward on paper. The government would survey the territory, divide it into orderly plots, sell it to settlers, and collect revenue as the population grew. It was a solution that promised both economic stability and the fulfillment of the American dream of westward expansion. But there was one enormous obstacle. This land was not empty. For centuries, these forests and rivers had been home to powerful Native American nations. The Miami, led by the brilliant war chief Little Turtle, controlled large parts of present-day Indiana and western Ohio. The Shawnee, under the charismatic Blue Jacket, dominated central Ohio. The Delaware, Wyandot, and dozens of other tribes had lived in these lands for generations. Far from being scattered, primitive bands, these nations were highly organized, with political systems, trade networks, and military traditions as sophisticated as any in Europe. Most importantly, they had learned a crucial lesson from the American Revolution. Unity was power. For the first time in generations, tribes that had once been bitter enemies were setting aside their rivalries to confront a common threat. American expansion. Under Little Turtle's guidance, this confederation would soon grow to nearly 10,000 warriors, making it one of the largest military alliances ever assembled in North America. The United States saw the Northwest Territory as the key to its survival. The Native Confederation saw it as the key to their existence. Both could not be true. The collision of these two visions was no longer a question of if, but when. The first real test of wills came in 1790. Determined to enforce American claims in the Northwest Territory, President George Washington authorized a military campaign to break Native resistance. He turned to a Revolutionary War veteran, General Josiah Harmer, a man with an impressive record on paper but little experience in the unforgiving wilderness of Ohio. Harmer assembled a force of more than 1,300 men. About 320 were regular soldiers from the U.S. Army, disciplined but few in number. The rest were militia, farmers, townsmen, and volunteers from Pennsylvania and Kentucky. On paper, it seemed overwhelming. After all, many Americans believed they were fighting nothing more than scattered war parties of so-called East savages. Confidence was high, and Harmer expected the Native Confederation to crumble at the sight of an organized army. But Little Turtle, the Miami war chief, had other plans. He had spent months preparing for the American advance. Using a network of scouts, he tracked Harmer's movements and studied the terrain. Every swamp, every river crossing, every stretch of forest could be turned into a weapon. With patient precision, he set the stage for an ambush that would humiliate the United States. As Harmer's expedition pushed deeper into Ohio, the soldiers soon discovered that the enemy was not where they expected him to be. Instead of open battles, they faced sudden, lightning-fast assault. Native warriors, many armed with British-supplied muskets, struck from the dense forests, inflicted casualties, and then vanished like ghosts. Harmer's men, unused to such tactics, fell into confusion. The militia especially, poorly trained and easily rattled, panicked when comrades dropped around them from invisible fire. The climax came when Little Turtle executed a brilliant deception. A small native force attacked Harmer's main camp, then retreated as if in panic. Smelling victory, Harmer ordered 400 of his best men in pursuit, but our retreat was an illusion. Waiting for them was the bulk of the Confederation, perfectly positioned in an ambush site. What followed was a slaughter. In less than 3 hours, Harmer lost 183 men killed and dozens more wounded. Little Turtle's warriors, by contrast, suffered fewer than a dozen casualties. Harmer's expedition collapsed into chaos. Survivors fled back to Fort Washington, abandoning supplies, artillery, and wounded comrades. For the young republic, the defeat was more than a military setback. It was a psychological shock. Here was a nation that had beaten the mighty British Empire, now humiliated by warriors who understood the forests better than any general. The message was clear. Taking the Northwest Territory would not be easy. After Harmer's humiliation, President Washington knew the stakes had only grown higher. The credibility of the United States was on the line, and the Northwest Territory remained firmly under native control. Determined to redeem the nation's honor, Washington ordered a large expedition, this time under General Arthur St. Clair, the governor of the Northwest Territory and a veteran of the Revolution. St. Clair was given unprecedented resources. More than 2,000 men were assembled, including 600 regular troops, artillery, and an extended supply chain stretching deep into Ohio. Newspapers' preparations, predicting that such a force would finally crush native resistance. Unlike Harmer's poorly organized militia, this seemed like an army destined for victory. But once again, Little Turtle and the Native Confederation proved that numbers on paper meant nothing against strategy, terrain, and discipline. As St. Clair marched into the Ohio wilderness in the fall of 1791, his army slowed under the weight of supplies, disease, and inexperience. Soldiers suffered from dysentery, food shortages, and bitter cold. St. Clair himself was crippled with gout, barely able to mount a horse. The confidence that had marked the expedition began to wither. On November 4th, 1791, the American army camped along the Wabash River in present-day western Ohio. The site was poorly chosen, dense forest on 3 sides and the river blocking retreat on the 4th. Sentries were badly positioned and no effort had been made to clear fields of fire. At dawn, Little Turtle struck. Over 1,000 warriors representing nearly a dozen tribes launched a coordinated assault from 3 directions. The attack was sudden, overwhelming, and devastating. Native fighters combined lightning mobility with disciplined volleys of musket fire, cutting down American soldiers before they could form ranks. The militia panicked almost instantly, scattering into the woods. Even the regular army, the supposed elite, faltered as cannons were captured and turned against them. St. Clair displayed remarkable courage, rallying what men he could despite illness and bullets tearing through his clothing. But bravery could not alter disaster. In less than 3 hours, his force of 1,400 men was reduced to ruin, 832 killed, 264 wounded. The casualty rate of over 75% made it proportionally the worst defeat in U.S. military history, greater even than Custer's last stand. Congress demanded investigations. Washington, furious, reportedly exploded in rage when he first heard the news. Abroad, Britain and Spain began questioning whether the United States could even survive. For Native Americans, the victory seemed to confirm that unity could hold back the Republic's advance. For Americans, the nightmare was only beginning. The disaster of St. Clair's defeat left the United States reeling. The young Republic had now suffered not 1 but 2 catastrophic losses at the hands of the Native American Confederation. With morale shattered, allies questioning America's survival, and settlers along the frontier terrified, President George Washington faced an existential crisis. Abandoning the Northwest Territory meant financial ruin and the collapse of America's westward ambitions. Yet another defeat could permanently destroy U.S. credibility at home and abroad. Washington decided he had only one option left: escalation. This time, there could be no half measures, no reliance on short-term militia who broke at the first sign of danger. The United States would have to create something new, a professional, permanent fighting force, trained specifically for the unforgiving warfare of the frontier. The man Washington chose to lead this desperate gamble was Anthony Wayne. To many, Wayne seemed an odd choice. Nicknamed Mad Anthony, during the Revolutionary War, he was known for bold, almost reckless assaults that defied conventional strategy. At Stony Point, he had led a midnight bayonet charge against a heavily fortified British position, taking the stronghold against all odds. At Monmouth, he rallied broken American lines and turned near defeat into a standstill. Some saw him as past his prime, others as too impulsive for a mission of such importance. But Washington saw something others did not. Wayne combined audacity with discipline and, most critically, he respected Native American military skill. Unlike Harmer and St. Clair, Wayne did not underestimate his opponent. Washington gave Wayne unprecedented authority to build what would become known as the Legion of the United States. This was not a patchwork force of farmers and part-time fighters. It was a reorganized army divided into 4 sub-legions, each containing infantry, cavalry, and artillery, designed to operate flexibly in frontier conditions. Wayne spent more than a year training his men at Legionville, near Pittsburgh, drilling them in marksmanship, small unit tactics, wilderness survival, and discipline. Just as important, Wayne innovated in intelligence gathering. He built a network of scouts, frontiersmen with years of experience in native lands, and forged alliances with tribes hostile to Little Turtle's confederation. He also built morale methodically. Wayne knew his men had to believe they could win. Through realistic training and carefully planned advances, he instilled confidence that this time the Americans would not break. For 2 years, Wayne prepared with relentless thoroughness. By 1794, he commanded nearly 3,000 disciplined soldiers, larger, better trained, and better supplied than any force the United States had ever fielded. The stage was set for a decisive showdown. But Little Turtle and the Confederation were not idle, and they too understood that the next battle could decide the fate of a continent. By 1794, the stage was set for an inevitable collision. General Anthony Wayne had spent more than 2 years molding the Legion of the United States into a disciplined professional force. Unlike his predecessors, he moved cautiously, establishing fortified bases, cutting roads through forests, and clearing fields of fire wherever his army encamped. Every detail was calculated to prevent another ambush like those that had destroyed Harmer and St. Clair. On the other side, Little Turtle's Confederation still stood strong, but the unity that had once been its greatest weapon was beginning to fracture. Victories had brought new warriors into the alliance, but also new rivalries and disagreements over strategy. Some leaders wanted a cautious approach, preserving their strength for a long struggle. Others, led by the fiery Shawnee chief Blue Jacket, demanded bold action, a decisive battle that could once again shatter American hopes. Little Turtle himself began to sense the danger. Intelligence reports told him that Wayne was not like Harmer or St. Clair. This new American general was careful, systematic, and, most importantly, patient. The Confederation's old tactics of ambush and surprise might not work against an army that refused to blunder into trap. Little Turtle quietly advised peace negotiations, believing that continued war risked the destruction of everything they had built. But his warnings were dismissed. For many warriors, the idea of surrender was unthinkable. In June 1794, the Confederation tested Wayne's preparations with a major assault on Fort Recovery, one of his newly built strongholds. More than 1,300 native warriors attacked at dawn, hoping to repeat their earlier triumph. The battle began with fierce intensity, but this time the Americans were ready. Fort Recovery had been designed with overlapping fields of fire and strong defensive positions. Wayne's men, drilled endlessly to withstand sudden attacks, held their ground. As the native warriors pressed forward, they found themselves trapped in a deadly killing zone with no cover and no easy retreat. For the first time, an American fort survived a full-scale Confederation assault. Casualties were heavy for the attackers. Over 100 warriors lost, while the Americans suffered only minimal losses. The failed attack shook the Confederation. It was the first significant defeat after years of success, and it sowed seeds of division. Some tribes began questioning the wisdom of continuing the war. Others blamed Little Turtle, accusing him of hesitation or even cowardice. Leadership began to shift toward Blue Jacket, who pushed for one final, decisive confrontation. The Confederation was still formidable, but its unity was weakening. The cracks that opened at Fort Recovery would grow larger in the weeks ahead, setting the stage for the showdown at Fallen Timbers. By midsummer of 1794, the Native American Confederation faced a critical choice. The failed assault on Fort Recovery had shaken confidence, and whispers of doubt spread through council fires from the Great Lakes to the Ohio River. Should they continue fighting a war that now seemed increasingly uncertain, or should they negotiate with General Anthony Wayne before disaster struck? At a great council of tribal leaders in July, the divide became clear. Little Turtle, once the architect of stunning victories, now urged caution. He had studied Wayne's preparations and recognized a dangerous truth. This American general was different. He would not walk blindly into an ambush. His troops were disciplined, well supplied, and carefully fortified at every step. "We cannot stand against him," Little Turtle warned. His words carried the weight of bitter experience, but they were not what many warriors wanted to hear. Blue Jacket, the Shawnee war chief, rose in defiance. Where Little Turtle saw inevitability, Blue Jacket saw opportunity. He argued that one last decisive battle could shatter Wayne's confidence and save their lands. To retreat now, he declared, was to surrender everything. His fiery determination swayed many of the younger warriors and chiefs hungry for action. In the end, the council chose war. Little Turtle's influence waned, and Blue Jacket emerged as the Confederation's primary military leader. Meanwhile, Wayne's slow but relentless advance pressed deeper into Ohio. Every mile was marked by caution and discipline. He cleared forests around his camps, built fortified supply depots, and never allowed his troops to grow complacent. His intelligence network reported constantly on native movements, giving him an awareness no previous commander had possessed. He drilled his men relentlessly, ensuring they could march, fight, and maneuver as a unified machine. By August 1794, both armies converged near present-day Toledo, Ohio. The battlefield was chosen by Blue Jacket, a stretch of ground known as Fallen Timbers, where a tornado had toppled hundreds of trees. The fallen logs created a tangled, chaotic landscape that seemed perfect for defense. Native warriors could use the natural cover, channel American movements, and retreat toward the nearby British fort at Miami if needed. To Blue Jacket, it was an ideal place to make a stand. But Wayne was no stranger to difficult terrain. He studied the battlefield carefully, Noting its strengths and its weaknesses, he prepared a plan that combined his cavalry's speed with the relentless push of infantry and the precision of artillery. Unlike past commanders, he was not walking into a trap. He was designing the battle on his own terms. The moment of decision had come. Both sides understood that what was about to unfold at Fallen Timbers would not simply decide the fate of Ohio. It would decide the destiny of a continent. On the morning of August 20, 1794, the forests of northern Ohio erupted in fire and fury. After years of skirmishes and crushing defeats, the young United States finally faced the native Confederation in open battle. The site, known as Fallen Timbers, was a chaotic landscape of toppled trees, the aftermath of a violent tornado. For Blue Jacket, this was the perfect battlefield. The tangled logs would shield his warriors, funnel the American advance, and allow for sudden counterattacks. Behind them lay Fort Miami, a British stronghold. If the battle turned against them, the Confederation could retreat and regroup under British protection. Everything seemed prepared for another American disaster, but Anthony Wayne was ready. At around 10 a.m., he unleashed his plan with precision. The first move was a cavalry charge, swift and unexpected. Horses thundered through the fallen logs, scattering warriors who had prepared for infantry, but not for mounted troops, striking at multiple points at once. Confusion rippled through native lines as the Americans pressed the attack from several directions simultaneously. Hot on their heels came the infantry. Wayne's soldiers advanced in coordinated waves, each line supporting the next. Trained relentlessly to withstand ambush, they moved with a discipline that stunned their opponents. Whenever warriors tried to retreat and regroup, American bayonets followed, denying them the chance to disengage. The very Fallen Timbers meant to serve as cover became obstacles, slowing movement and trapping defenders. Blue Jacket fought desperately to rally his men, but Wayne had held back reserves for exactly this moment. Spotting a gap where tribal units failed to coordinate, he hurled his fresh troops into the breach. The line split, and suddenly the Confederation was no longer a unified force, but scattered fragments fighting in isolation. The momentum turned rapidly. What had begun as a defensive stand collapsed into a rout. In less than 2 hours, the Confederation that had once shattered 2 American armies was broken. Wayne's losses were light, about 33 killed and 100 wounded, while the native dead numbered in the hundreds. But the true shock came after the battle. As Blue Jacket's warriors fled toward Fort Miami, expecting sanctuary from their British allies, they found the gates locked. British commanders, fearing direct war with the United States, refused to intervene. Warriors who had counted on support were left abandoned in their hour of need. Wayne's victory at Fallen Timbers was not another skirmish. It was a transformation. It proved that the United States, when properly led and prepared, could defeat the most formidable native confederation ever assembled. In that tangled field of shattered trees, the fate of a continent shifted forever. The smoke of Fallen Timbers had barely cleared when its consequences began to unfold. For the Native American Confederation, the defeat was devastating not only militarily but psychologically. For years, their unity had been their strength, their victories a symbol that American expansion could be resisted. But in less than 2 hours, that dream lay shattered among the broken trees. Warriors returned to their villages disheartened, their confidence shaken, and their trust in the British allies, who had abandoned them at Fort Miami, deeply eroded. In the days following the battle, tribal leaders who had once vowed never to surrender began sending peace feelers to General Anthony Wayne. The Confederation, once a powerful alliance stretching from the Great Lakes to the Ohio River, dissolved rapidly as tribes sought the best possible terms for themselves rather than risk annihilation in further war. Little Turtle, once criticized for urging caution, now stepped forward as the chief negotiator. Though his days as a war leader were over, his influence as a diplomat would shape the coming peace. Wayne, ever methodical, did not rush. Army, proving the value of training, discipline, and respect for one's enemy. The Northwest Territory became the blueprint for future expansion, setting patterns that would carry America to the Pacific. And psychologically, the victory gave Americans the confidence to believe their nation was destined for continental greatness. In that broken field of toppled trees, the course of history bent sharply. The United States emerged stronger, determined, and unshakable in its drive westward. For the native nations, it was the beginning of a long, painful struggle to survive in a world that had forever changed. Fallen Timbers was not just a battle. It was the moment a continent's future was decided.